And we are live. We are recording. Hey everybody, welcome back to Drew the Catholic. Thanks for watching another episode here. I'm Drew the Catholic. And with me today, we have our new studio set up for the first time. And we have Dr. Petroc Willie, all the way from Steubenville, Ohio, out visiting your son and your daughter-in-law and your granddaughter, Teresa. And we actually got him to be on our podcast today. I don't know why you agreed to it, but thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure we'll have a great conversation.
Oh, thank you, Drew. Thanks for the hospitality. It's lovely being here. Yeah, and it's a beautiful time of a retreat just for my wife, Catherine, and myself to be with Benedict, and Carly and Teresa. So it's been lovely being here. I really noticed the altitude. I've been, really feeling, sort of the change in oxygen levels.
Oh, yeah.
But what a beautiful place to be. And so we've come up from Steubenville now, as you can tell from my accent, Drew. Not originally from
really
Ohio.
Solid Ohio accent.
Yeah, not from Texas. So I always say I'm a hobbit.
Okay.
Because essentially, I've spent most of my life in a shire of one form or another.
Awesome.
And in fact, where we last lived in England, it was in the Shrewsbury Diocese.
Okay.
Which has got, amongst other places, probably the setting of the Wrekin for where Weathertop was actually based in Lord of the Rings. And
awesome.
the parish we went to was a parish where J.R. Tolkien went.
Really?
Was a server, the Oratory in Birmingham.
Oh, wow.
So we're very fortunate, really. So right from the kind of the heart of England like that.
Wow.
So it's been really...
So when you're reading Lord of the Rings, you're just picturing home, and that's a pretty accurate depiction of what he was probably thinking
It
about.
really is.
Yeah.
The Shire, I know it was filmed in New Zealand. They did a pretty good job of picturing what it would be like in kind of rural parts of England.
Sure.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So really that's my background, is sort of rural England.
Okay.
Raised in Canterbury.
Awesome.
And raised originally as a Baptist. I know that you're a convert, Drew. So originally raised a Baptist in a really, really wonderful Baptist church. A very fine pastor and very welcoming and with solid Christian parents and home.
Awesome.
So,
that's phenomenal.
So a great upbringing. And I've been on a very, very long journey really to Catholicism. And I feel I'm still on it very much. Funnily enough, when you become Catholic finally, I'm not sure you have entered so much as you've begun an entry.
Right.
That's in a way one of the things that really attracted me to Catholicism, that it's you feel you're entering the mystery. That's the whole sense. There's a fullness there which has attracted you, and you haven't exhausted it at the moment you've come in.
Right.
And I think, funnily enough, if I was to try and identify why I was lacking in some kind of satisfaction with being a Protestant, I think it would be just because I was looking for that sense of journey into fullness, I suspect. And I'm not sure that I could see how the Baptists did it.
Right.
I couldn't quite... Anyway, now I teach catechetics and evangelization at Franciscan University, which is an amazing place to be. It's got a faculty just of 8 professors teaching this, which is unlike anywhere in the world, I think, that has such a kind of consolidation and a history of handing on the faith. Before that, back in England, I've spent all my adult life really teaching Catholicism in one form or another.
Okay.
So I began at a small college in Oxford, teaching Catholic social ethics and some philosophy. And I then went on and taught in a place called Maryvale Institute, which was, again, an amazing grace. I was there 21 years. And it was the first home physically given to Cardinal Newman when he became a Catholic.
Oh, wow.
So they gave him this place, he named it Maryvale House. Mary in the Valley, then he named it Maryvale. And he lived there and he founded the oratory from there.
Okay.
So it was lovely being in the house. You just touched the banisters, and you're touching this kind of relic. This is the room Newman would have slept in, so can I sleep in that bed?
Right, that's amazing.
I don't think it's the same bed, but it's the same room. So enough, there's a lovely sense. I mean, I'm sure you feel the same, Drew, again. Isn't it a wonderful sense of just being surrounded by sacred history?
It is. Absolutely.
That's in a way one of the great gifts of the Catholic Church.
And I'm sure over there, across the pond in England, even more so, probably upon converting, you have a deeper appreciation of not just your English history, but realizing the roots of that probably go further back than,
Sure.
like Elizabethan periods and the Reformational period. There's probably a depth to that. And seeing all of those places that go back,
Yeah.
I mean, all the way to Canterbury, right? And
Sure.
the early periods of the, Catholicism coming there.
Yeah. No, you did. And I was raised on a very small road called Pilgrim's Way, which
Okay.
was part of the original Pilgrim's route, which really took off. That Pilgrim's route took off after Thomas à Becket
Okay.
was murdered by the knights under King Henry's apparent command or wish that he should be, got rid of in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And after his death, he became a kind of martyr figure. Lots of miracles sprang up in the
Right.
cathedral, and it became a pilgrimage
Oh, wow.
site, really, in a big way.
So in a way, you were almost destined for a conversion.
I was, the Catechism says we're created in a state of journeying,
Mm-hmm.
and I almost feel, God was very good to me. He put me in a pilgrim place, with that
Yeah, it's
sense of,
providential,
you need to be ready to move.
Right.
I've just finished reading a book, actually, a really interesting book by somebody called Eric Varden,
Okay.
called The Shattering of Loneliness.
Hmm.
And it's about the importance of memory in the Christian life. And one of the things, he's got a whole chapter on remember Lot's wife, which I'd never really noticed before, that Jesus says that at one point, remember Lot's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And he's written a very interesting chapter on it, but it really is about the importance of being able to deal with your own past well and not looking back in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
You become the pillar of salt.
Right. You get stuck in
You get stuck in your past, and I do think that's. I mean, I recognize the temptation myself, and I think every time one moves, Newman wrote this book called Loss and Gain, about conversion. There is always loss and there's always gain, and we can get very attached to the loss. A bit like the Israelites,
Right.
chuntering through the desert, and wishing they had the onions from Egypt.
We have some kids going wild upstairs. If anyone can hear that, that's.
Is that beautiful?
It is. It's
Is that
beautiful.
This is life is going on.
Yeah.
This is how conversation should take place
Right,
in the
right.
midst of family life.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's just wonderful. Yeah. So the yearning for the garlics of Egypt. That's something which one always has to let go of, however good the move forward is. And I can see that in my own life. One lives in a half converted state, but always trying to put
Right.
the promise before the past.
Right. And once converted, always converting. You're always going deeper
Sure.
and realizing how much. Well, you might have come this far, and then you look back and you go, "Wow, we still have so far to go that you didn't even know of." And
Sure.
if you had seen that at the beginning, maybe it would have been a daunting.
That's right.
First step.
All those giants waiting
Yeah.
for us in the promised land. I think I'll stay in the desert a bit longer.
Yeah. Right.
So
Absolutely.
yes, that's right. So it's good God doesn't show us the future.
Right.
He just promises us.
Yeah. As much as we might want to
see it.
And,
Yeah. Yes.
It's best in His hands. That's for certain.
It's best in His hands. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, and in catechetics, I think I'm sure you read the Catechism like me, and it's one of my best loved books, the Catechism itself.
I love it. Yeah.
And in the beginning of the prologue, one of the important things for all preaching and teaching, which we always say, but I've only realized recently just how important it is. It's in the Catechism, paragraph 25. They take a pastoral principle from the Catechism of the Council of Trent and say, this is the one we want to use still. And it's teaching to the love that never ends. So all the doctrinal teaching you do should be directed to the love, which presumably is eternity. In other words, you direct all your teaching, you somehow show it's part of that. And I've realized, gosh, isn't it important to be able to teach about heaven well? To be able to teach about, the future well, God's promises well, because that really is the motivational force in the Christian life. We're always drawn, from the conversion, there's something exciting you're moving into, you're
Absolutely.
going to be part of.
Yeah.
So
something much bigger than you. I think that was a big part of it for me was I found, in when I studied theology, that initial journey into knowing nothing about the Bible and nothing about Christianity to feeling like something, a little bit at least, was really enticing. But then you get to a point, or at least I got to a point where there wasn't a very high challenge to continue. There wasn't a very high challenge to continue growing. There was a lot of emphasis on initially becoming a Christian and starting that walk, but there wasn't a ton of emphasis, at least in the evangelical streams I was a part of deepening that discipleship in a mature way, So I started to realize there was, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but there was a pattern of people who had entered and were zealous, but were kind of in a stasis of the same level of development, the same level of intellectual knowledge, but also of spiritual depth, right? They hadn't had a deepening formation. And that's what launched me into, once I encountered Anglicanism, like, oh, there's a lot of depth here, and the rule isn't restrictive, like some might think or might say it is, but it's actually beneficial, and it's deepening, and it's formational, right? And then ultimately Catholicism, more than that, it's just like you've said, it's endless. And upon entering it, you're like, uh-oh. There's 2,000 years just of like papal encyclicals to sift through, if you so desire, and then all the spiritual traditions. Really, Catholicism internally is perhaps every bit as broad as Protestantism, but still unified. Which was really attractive to me because it was never ending. You might know a thing or two about theology, but your personal practice and your personal discovery and integration of it is a lifelong thing. Yeah,
sure. I really agree with that. So that sense of the danger of plateauing, though I couldn't have said it like that. I think, you kind of know in a sense your life is bigger than, and this is why I'm so cautious about saying anything, a bit like you in a way, objectively about Protestantism in one sense. I still read, for example, Oswald Chambers.
Okay.
My utmost for his highest. And I just think, wow, this man, I feel this is, in so many ways, he's so far ahead of me. And my theology is only as large as I am. I really get this. I know Catholicism is the largest thing I could possibly want to belong to. I know that, and I knew, like you, I'm attracted to that sense of the awe-inspiring mystery of the whole. But at the same time, I do know that I'm limited in my perception of what it is I've entered into.
Right.
And I'm continually being surprised by the size of it. And so that does push you always. In fact, I was helped, we talk about theology, bits of theology suddenly begin to make sense for you. When I first came across a lot of the fathers teaching on we're made in the image and likeness of God, that they started saying, okay, we've got two things here, not just one thing. It's not just you're made in the image and likeness, two ways of saying the same thing, which I think I'd always assumed it was.
Yeah, I would have too. Yeah.
And then you start saying, oh, they think the image in a way is your starting point. That's what confers your dignity. You're made with freedom and intellect and will, and you have the capacities. But when we say likeness, we're saying to be like God, which is the stretch.
Okay.
Which is, so it's like seed to red rose.
Right.
The image is the seed.
Okay.
And we're born with that, and baptism is the seed with the virtues, But where's the stretch to the red rose? That's the likeness. So fathers, I came to the fathers quite late.
Okay.
A lot of my own formation was such malformation. I think that the advantage of it for me has been that as somebody involved in trying to teach the faith, I kind of can be very aware of the gaps, the lack of foundations people might have, because I was aware I went through a system of apparently giving me lots of foundations, but in fact it missed out everything now I would have thought was important.
Interesting. Okay.
So, for example, and I don't want to just hog it because I'd love to hear whether you've had the same experience, but so, for example, when I went to study theology, I studied at King's College in London. That was, at the time, one of the most respected places to study a kind of a very credible academic theology.
Okay.
And yet when we studied, for example, we read almost none of the fathers. The way we studied the Bible was historical critical methodology only. No introduction to any other kind of 2,000-year tradition of how you
Sure.
study the Bible.
Yeah, you just take it for granted.
Just take
that
it for
the historical
granted.
critical is the way to go. Yeah.
No sense of how would
Right.
the rabbinic tradition have studied it. You know, it's suddenly you just get the German 18th, 19th century.
Absolutely.
That's the way of doing
Yep.
it. You know,
That's exactly how my experience was. Yeah.
and then we studied philosophy for theology, but we wouldn't read anything before Descartes. So you're starting in the 17th century.
That's so new. Yeah.
Yeah, which is so you get no Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Augustine. You know, you get no development of the whole patristic theology and philosophy. None of the Middle Ages. So it's almost as though you just study the moderns all the time.
Right.
And it's
Right.
what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery. You know,
Absolutely.
if it's later, it's better. It's as though
Yeah.
if
we clearly know better than they did.
we
Yeah.
always did.
Yeah.
And I was very struck that I could never have held my own with Plato or Socrates.
Oh,
You know, that I
absolutely.
could never, in a conversation, I wouldn't know where to go.
Absolutely.
So I had to learn all of this after,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I had to do a lot of reading myself into the tradition. No, that's only to say we lack a lot of foundations. And I think the way, in particular, this may be how a lot of people, again, who are more educated in the Catholic faith, who we're speaking to today, they may have received the same kind of fairly desiccated and in some ways quite an arid formation, which is not really fully rounded, patristic, grounded in good doctrine, you know, so on. I know the priest who ran the institute in England said that at the end of his seminary formation there was something called the book burning ceremony, and the priests, the seminarians who were graduating, used to burn their books.
Really?
Because it had been so they were very desirous of getting into pastoral ministry, into teaching, into proclamation. You know, they'd been driven by a love for God's word and wanting to proclaim it. But what they'd received at the time, and I don't think the seminary is like this now, so I'm speaking about its past, but it is it was when he was there. There was a whole sense that what they had received was not able to be fruitfully communicated in a life-giving way to anybody, and it hadn't fed them spiritually.
Okay.
And I know when I first came across the Catechism, which is a book which has really transformed my life, I expected to be reading a kind of reference manual.
Yeah,
of
that's
the
what
faith.
you would expect. Yeah, that's what I thought too. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I opened it up and I read it, and I realized, first of all, that I didn't really understand it. I'd done theology degrees, I'd already got a doctorate, and I still didn't really understand where this was coming from. And yet it was claiming to be the universal common doctrine of the church. So somehow I'd missed that. And my theology had been not predicated upon that, expanding it, developing it, and so on. It had been isolated from that. And I realized, you know, I'd lacked the foundations, so I needed now to rebuild.
Yeah.
And the rebuilding I found the most spiritually innovating and, you know, developmentally fruitful thing that I could have imagined. And I found later on, Ratzinger says, when he's introducing the compendium, the little mini version of the Catechism, he says, the Catechism will always be the place we go to for its spiritual depth and for its wisdom. And that's what I found there. I didn't find a reference book. I found almost like a spiritual treatise that wanted to say, you'll learn the Catholic faith if you live it deeply in prayer, knowing what you're receiving by way of sacramental grace and the liturgy, you know, and realizing you belong to the mystery of Christ who is alive in his body. It was a different spirituality of the body, which I hadn't come across. Richly patristic and liturgical.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was a beautiful experience, but I felt my mind was being converted to Catholicism was for the first time as I read that.
Wow.
So
wow. Yeah, that's I relate a lot to what you said about the like the malformation, I think is the word you used, right? You know, in my evangelical days I had a heavy diet of, you know, exegesis one verse at a time, just enough historical context to make the sermon interesting, right, or the book readable and interesting and credible. but none of the depth of where did this all come from? Where did our ideas of what Scripture should mean come from? Where did the spiritual, the spiritual legacies of the church come from? And this was even in a time, there was a lot of churches around us starting to read like Richard Foster and Dallas Willard and reintroduce Lectio Divina and contemplative prayer and all these things that were so beneficial, but as if they came out in the 1970s when Richard Foster wrote about them and not thousands of years earlier. That was my own discovery. I remember taking a church history class, and that was what for me confronted, like you said, the arrogance of we know better because we're newer, right? I realized, with some of the early church fathers, and even some of the ones that might have a stained reputation, like Origen, writing so many books and just being so prolific and so intelligent, that there's no part of the people in our age that are necessarily smarter than before. You look at the fathers, there's so many that are brilliant that I could never hold a candle to. Like even Augustine, you read Augustine, it's like, wow, what a mind, know. Or St. Thomas Aquinas, for sure. He's the heavy hitter. If you can read the Summa, then that's tough stuff. So that was a big part of it. And then realizing there's this whole beautiful narrative in church history. And even in my church history class, we just kind of brushed over it. And I had a good professor who we were all Reformed, many of us Calvinist type of kids in that class. And he did a good thing in that he wanted to challenge us a little bit with that. So he would present someone from the early church, like Gregory of Nyssa, for instance, maybe slightly too universalist for someone that's very Reformed. And he would present him in a really good light. And then he would get to John Calvin and show you all of his blemishes, which was really fair. But I still regret that we didn't go into the actual sources of the fathers. We read like their bios and maybe a couple quotes and learned a little bit about their lives, but that sparked a curiosity of like, well, I want to know about those people. Those were the people that inherited whatever it was that the apostles left. And then you read it and come to find out. So I felt the same way of, and there was almost sort of to be truthful, a resentment of like, well, why haven't we talked about this? Why haven't I read these letters before? Why didn't I even know that, St. Irenaeus was writing so early about things that are so seemingly Catholic, But yeah, there was a lot that shifted, and one of them was, what you mentioned in that the historical critical method or bust type of approach, realizing how the fathers read the Bible and do theology is very similar to a rabbinic context. Yeah. And so for them, that was on the table, whereas for us, we were taught, well, that's just intellectually not that rigorous or great, and it's too mythological or too over-spiritualizing, the analogous readings of Scripture. Things like that aren't as good as hard exegesis, But realizing that much of the doctrines that we believed came from that sort of, typology-rooted, multi-layered approach to Scripture. That was a huge foundational shift. And then it's one, I think once you go through it, you can't even look at the Scriptures the same way. And then if you're having a conversation with someone that's had not had that paradigm shift, you're like, oh no, it's kind of tough to only get back into a narrow frame of mind. And exegesis is beautiful, but there's something about that richness. And it's not strictly, how do I want to say this? It's not the academic sort of approach that we've been trained to take in our culture, right? You're approaching the Bible as a narrative, not for the sake of it not having happened, but for the sake of that's how the authors and that's how God himself has communicated it to our humanity in a way, right? And that makes it so much deeper and almost more true, even if it literally is true in like the historical things and all of that, it's almost more true since it speaks to that deeper sense as well. And the fact that it can do that so consistently and beautifully is not to be ignored. But I think that's something I realized in my formation. There was a dryness to not having that once you have it, it just feels like this waterfall of so much to chew on.
It's interesting, isn't it? The sola scriptura. Maybe this is a principle for the whole of the way we should try and think. If you try to take something and make it not so much just a focus point, but the only thing, like Scripture alone. As you said, what happened was, in a way, it shrunk because it didn't have apostolic tradition to go to say, well, how's tradition read?
Right.
The Scriptures.
Right.
So, and as soon as that happened, I remember Origen said he says in one of his places, this scripture just has so many meanings. Where shall we begin?
Yeah.
That sense of, okay, I'm just beginning to move into this ocean.
Right.
And that was the way in which the fathers approached it, which Protestantism, which loves the scriptures so much, in a way, is love for something is not the same thing as it's the exclusionary principle of Protestantism seems to be the problem. It's we've got this, therefore not that.
Right.
The kind of the both and approach of Catholicism is what saves every element of it.
Right.
Because the richness is supplied only in communication with the other elements of the faith. That seems to be it. Yeah. So discovering the fathers, discovering the unity of Scripture, the way the church has always seen it as one, and as the message of God with his one plan. I think I found after a while, and especially the more I moved into trying to understand what the church meant by how do you transmit the faith, that all of this is a kind of profound confidence in God. That's Catholicism is built upon the fact, well, in the first place, a very simple way of thinking, why does Catholicism accept tradition as well? It's just that it trusted Jesus and the Spirit in the way they formed the apostles. And the church trusts that Jesus' promises would be kept to maintain the faith. It's a kind of a very childlike trust in God's plan, it seems to me, is what Catholicism relies upon. That doesn't deny the human failings at every point in the church, or deny that we can go terribly wrong. And we know our own short-sightedness, but that God is able to handle our problems.
Yeah.
And
that was a big, actually, almost apologetic argument for me, is looking at the blemishes of church history and some of the worst figures in it, and saying, how is this place still around? How is this church still around? Any other human institution certainly would have collapsed. But yeah, that is beautiful.
And it is based on, in a way, the apostles, the way the Gospels. I'm really impressed by the way the scriptures are so happy to have its heroes with all the blemishes presented in a way that I think would be quite rare even now for, let's say, a political movement to try to have its at least its founding members. I know Christ founded the church, but at least the founding membership. So obviously obtuse. Ill-disciplined, backsliding, and needing to be rescued at every point. The Old Testament does set up God's plan like that very much. His pedagogy has to be one of mercy and overcoming problems over and over again. And interestingly, again, and I don't know whether this is typical at all. This may be my lack of formation, but I came out of my Baptist phase knowing about the Exodus, but never about the exile. And when I first went to university and we were doing the exilic period, I was trying to understand this as the Exodus period. I had no sense of the narrative being, if you like, the entire collapse of both kingdoms. Everything God has founded is going to collapse.
Horribly wrong.
It's horribly wrong, and the fruitfulness is going to come out of the moment of collapse. That's where the new. It's not that God will, like Noah's Ark, wash it away and start. He's kind of promised that's not the way the plan works. It's that God does kind of jujitsu on the situation. He uses the weakness to bring in grace. And I do think the church has embraced that principle by firstly making canonical all the scriptures which were willing to present the apostles in such a bad light. So that as they themselves transmitted to the post-apostolic period, the picture they were giving was of themselves, very, very needy and constantly being misunderstood and misunderstanding and so on. And I think that's a powerful statement which enables one to look at the state of the church in any age. Because I think we're so conscious of it now, but I mean, anybody conscious of church history isn't frightened of the church today at all.
Right. It's certainly been worse. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so it's, we've got our challenges today, but we've been there before in other ways.
Right.
And the Groucho Marx comment, he never belonged to any club that would have him. That's as soon as one's a kind of repentant sinner,
sure.
you know that it's only by God's grace you're in the church at all anyway. You cannot throw stones.
Right.
Right. And I was helped when somebody just explained to me the way the church uses the Pope as servant of the servants of God. That concept, and how we typically think of the hierarchy in a kind of pyramid fashion,
right?
Rather than an inverted pyramid.
Absolutely.
And then as soon as you think that, you think, well, there's the Pope at the bottom, and oh wow, that's the Jesuit order just gone and dropped into the ocean. Yeah, we're just about to lose Germany. So that's what it's like being the Pope. Don't wobble at the bottom.
Right.
It really is. And, the need to pray for the hierarchy, because the hierarchy are the sub-hierarchy. They are the servants of the laity. And we need the strengthening from the hierarchy. And so we must pray they don't wobble too much. But they as followers of Peter, they're going to wobble.
Right.
Christ has promised that they will strengthen the brethren and the faith will survive. But it survives in earthen vessels, and so that's something that's been good to be able to address. And I think we talk about the kind of the journey theme.
Right.
That's good because it helps one think about one's own journey in a way, a bit like in the Book of Numbers, I think it is, where they had to kind of mark all the staging posts, which are all the most posts of God's mercy, And in the same way, we can look back on our lives and see those moments. That's how God leads us, and trust that He will in the future.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, but Catechetics is a great. I mean, you're involved in. What made you get into thinking of doing podcasts? Presumably, you wanted to evangelize and catechize,
Absolutely, yeah. Well, what the part of me that thought he was going to be a minister and be a pastor.
Oh yeah, sure.
I think it's a way of sort of fulfilling that itch. And then really what it was is I think in converting, both of us, Gina and myself, have never been so evangelistic, if that makes sense, And I think a big part of it was before I was like a theology nerd. So like the intellectual part of it was like, oh, this stuff is curious and it's important, of course. But I was always a bit hesitant to evangelize in the sense that, okay, well, great, you're, welcome. You've come to Jesus. Don't mind the mess of picking a denomination and finding a place to land, and you'll probably never fully agree with your pastor and all that. So it was tough for me to think of that, and really just kind of scary of like, oh well, there's a lot of things about my church that I don't like. So do I really want to invite someone into that mess? And that's certainly still true as a Catholic, but I think just having discovered the richness and beauty and the fullness of the faith, it really ignited something in me, and I've never been so impossible to shut up, I guess. It's probably the way to
wonderful.
Put it. Yeah.
That's
because it was like discovering, because when I studied the scriptures and I really got into like the Jewish roots of the faith, I was reading a lot of N.T. Wright and just consuming everything about the new perspective on Paul and going, this is how we should read the New Testament because it's re-Judaizing this, and we're understanding how the Old Covenant and the New Covenant are linked. It's not like this, well, it was works back then and now it's not type of thing. There was continuity. But that was almost like a story about times past, and we had to live a very different sort of Christianity now. But then when they come together in terms of becoming Catholic, I mean, first off, I think the continuity is even greater, even if most people don't understand or realize that walking into your average parish, you're seeing, in some sense, something similar to the temple. And when you're going through the Mass, there are so many components that are just like what God commanded his people to do in the Old Testament with the festival days and the worship and, the new Passover. We have priests. There's so much of that stuff. And it was just like, this is the same God yesterday, today, and forever. And everything he did in the Old Testament that was good and beautiful and true is fully present in the New Covenant in his church, in the Catholic Church. Even if the people in your particular parish or running the whole thing are, maybe a bit dull sometimes or whatever it is, or even if they don't recognize that beauty, but they're still faithful to just the sacraments and the liturgy. All of that stuff is being carried forward. And I think that was, it was surprising in that I was in a place where I was like, God is still with his people, but the church, oh man, I don't know how he's going to fix that mess. When I was Protestant, because I'm looking at all these different denominations, and how is Jesus ever going to get his dying wish of may they be one as you and I are one to the Father, but then discovering that all along it's always been here. The fullness of it has always been here. So it's not like we've lost anything that we have to recover. We just have to recover the brethren who have maybe separated themselves and maybe re-evangelize the people sitting in the pews that don't know what's sitting in front of them when he raises the host, But aside from that, it is all right there, and it's never gone anywhere. And it might, at some points it might be brutally attacked, and at other points it might just be a dusty thing in the corner that most people have forgotten about. And I think we're kind of in between both of those, but it's still there, like Jesus is still in the tabernacle of every Catholic parish in the world. And that's, I don't know, that was so invigorating to me. It's inspired the podcast for sure. And I think this is just a symptom of me just being infected with zeal in a way,
Sure.
Maybe a little too much sometimes. I think God's going to temper it in some ways. And, but at the same time, Gina and I both have never been so excited, because we were church kids in the sense that she was in the Navigator, so she was very formed biblically and wanted to evangelize and lead Bible studies, and I was the same way. But there's something different about pre-confirmation and post-confirmation Drew and Gina Lowen, and I think it really has launched us in a way.
Sacramental grace is real.
Absolutely.
And I think, John Paul said he wrote this encyclical, Catechesis in Our Time. And he says there to bishops, if catechesis is done well in your diocese, everything goes well. And I think that's what you've realized. Far from it being anything you could ever do too much of, it's the key to the real renewal of the church, to make catechesis and evangelization go really well. And I think it's an exciting place to be, because, as you say, you've got, on the one hand, you're picking up the whole of the tradition of the church, and you're engaging the whole of culture. So it's that moment of communication, and you're trying to see what's happening. And one of the ways I always describe it, because my forefathers were Cornish miners. So they had, what was it, the bird they put down the mine?
The canary.
The canary down the mine. You know what I mean?
Mine, yeah.
So if the canary down the coal mine falls off its perch,
get out.
There's gas. So, and I always think catechesis and evangelization is a bit like the canary in the mine for the church. Because if people are being well formed and the communication is going well, then you know that the culture, first of all, is able to receive it. There's the foundations are there. The church always talks about the seeds of the word. We know it's always there in principle. But for example, we know that when we say something simple like be obedient to God, so many people think of God in the way that the philosophical tradition from Feuerbach and so on down has given it to us, which is, God is almost like a sort of a kind of a Jedi of some sort.
Sure.
So he's a supreme being in the universe. Yeah. He's the great he's a created being. He's just one of the beings, but he's the one don't mess with him, So he's one of them, And that misunderstanding, of course, means everything in your Christian life doesn't work well, and nobody will find obedience liberating, and the truth can't set you free, right? Because it's his truth, not mine. So I've got to go for my truth, defend myself, my integrity, my experience, all of this, which we know is nonsense once you've understood who God is, that God is being itself.
And the most liberating thing you could do is be obedient.
Because that truth is your own truth. It's the source of your own life. You've been not to be obedient to what is your deepest joy and source and happiness, makes no sense. But as long as you think of God as an external being, just to you, in that sense of one being outside myself,
someone imposing stuff on you, why?
So we know there's a lot, and I was very helped by John Paul in his encyclical Faith and Reason. He said there are three foundations which, if they're not solidly in people's lives, they cannot receive the word of God. And the first is the foundation that the world makes sense. There is if you like, it's an ordered, wise entity. In other words, there's something there which is is coherent with itself. There is truth to be discovered. If you don't have that in your mind, nothing anybody says to you about the Christian life will really take root. So you have to deal with that kind of sense of, relativism in culture. Secondly, he said that we can know in some way what the wisdom, we can know the wisdom of the world, that there is something in our human nature which fits our minds to know it as well. Unless you have confidence in the human mind to do it, again, you cannot think it's anything other than some kind of personal emotional response.
Right.
So that's the second. And the third foundation is that the world is valuable and worth knowing. It's good. Because again, unless there's something worth seeking there, it's not your good. Right. Then you're not going to embrace it either. So, and they're very basic foundations, aren't they? But it's almost as though and catechesis seems to me is exciting because it's looking for how to put those foundations in place so the word of God can now be received and received properly. I mean, the word mystery for us, we know how rich that is. For so many people, when we say Christianity is a great mystery, they just think, oh, they're saying we don't know what it is.
They can't explain it.
They can't
hold
explain
on
it.
to it anyways.
Sure. So they're saying something like that.
It's a cop out,
Or the word conscience. The word conscience means that my individual mind can know the good with such, I know it's subjective in a way, but it can reach the good with such certainty that I can stand by that myself. Whereas conscience now, if you say follow your conscience, it means follow your own subjective thought about how things are.
Follow your impulsivity.
Rather than you have a dignity that you know the good. So our language, and I was helped again by, Alistair McIntyre's book After Virtue. He really says there's been this kind of disintegration of the tradition of Christianity held it, but of course it was built up during the whole kind of Greek and Roman period as well, and the Jewish period, and all came together in Athens and Jerusalem, and it's been carried forward by the Catholic Church. But when that tradition is so fundamentally attacked as it was, mainly by Germans, but of course by English people as well, the English and the Germans, did a bad job on the whole thing. But once that becomes, the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment, and then what postmodernism, where basically, there is no truth except for one's own truth, and you have to rebuild the foundations. And Chesterton once said the church guards all the natural goods as well. So true that she depends upon them because nature and grace belong together, creation and redemption, and the church holds all that. So, I mean, you have to be Catholic in today's world. If you want to be sane, if you want to think there is a world worth exploring, that there's a good world, the church is what holds that truth in a way that nowhere else does. It still holds the whole of our Western tradition.
Right.
And I'm hoping, it seems to me, this is my own experience of the church in England, was that it was still very nervous about its own status and what it could say. It's been a persecuted church, and it gets nervous about announcing that fundamental truth which it's got to give. This is the place of, it's a bit like Noah's Ark. This is where the truths are held securely and firmly. And I think, what I'm seeing in the United States, and this may be a misunderstanding, but I'm seeing the evangelicals as much more confident typically that they're holding the truths of nature as well as grace. Places, Bishop Barron, Word on Fire, he's really kind of articulating it strongly. It's not that there aren't bishops doing it. I know, and I'm not saying anything, but I'm seeing the church as being more nervous than she should be because, we have confidence in God, not in ourselves, and God has given us and rooted these truths in his church, because revelation guards the truths of reason, and I do think that the church needs to just regain that simple confidence in God again.
Yeah.
To proclaim again.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That has been something I've experienced. There's almost a disconnect in when I was on this journey, and I mean, especially as I started delving into like Catholic social teaching and things like that. It wasn't just that, oh, this is Jesus' church, but it also was like, wow, we have solutions to all the problems of the world. I mean, really, quite truly, and there was not the very loud mouthpiece I would expect in terms, and you don't want to be loud in terms of being boisterous just for the sake of it, but there is a, generally speaking, from the evangelicals, almost a strong, this might be a little offensive, but strong blind confidence in like the fundamentals, right? Like fundamentalism becoming evangelicalism at some point, and then there's almost like a politicization of that as well, of like, we're going to be the ones that save America or save the West or whatever it is. But I think what's interesting, at least for me, is discovering that all of that, like you said, actually is the heritage of the Catholic Church. And I've been talking with friends about this, and I'm like, well, being conservative is one thing, but Catholicism is conservatism truly and properly, in that it's the preservation of the apostolic traditions, and it holds and carries forth the teachings of justice and how we ought to relate to our neighbors and to our government and things like that, and not just in like it's not conservatism in the strict American GOP sense, but it's rooted in all of those things that, if held, can form a person properly to interact with God and neighbor and self in the way that we were designed to. And if you let go or twist any part of that, it starts to get out of whack. But yeah, I think that is kind of part of, at least for me, what I wish to see in the church, and what I hope to do with this podcast is talk about those things in a way that's not, we don't have to hold our picket signs but I think people are thirsty for something solid to bite down on, something that can actually hold the weight of our existence, right? Because it seems that in culture it's become so postmodern and relativistic that the whole follow your own truth, well, people quickly determine, I don't know if I want to follow my own truth. It's not much to stand on, and if you find yourself in any sort of hopelessness or discontentment with your life, well, then it's following your own leads not working out very well. And if there's nothing else but that, then what do we have but a sort of nihilistic lost existence, And I think that is a crucial moment. And if you have the most solid thing to bite on, quite literally, Jesus in the Eucharist, right? Versus almost a sort of like atheistic Gnosticism emerging in the postmodern worldview of self-creation and escape from material existence and all of these things. Catholicism is so redemptive of all of that, Here's a way to love your body and to love creation and the material world in its proper place, not in such a way that you're narcissist, right? But in such a way that you receive the gift of creation and of your own createdness, and the limits, the responsibilities that are paired with those liberties to orient everything. No, you're. I mean, I really agree with you in every way, and I think that one of the challenging, articulating those kind of things and explaining them is going to be really important, because as you know, I think people today don't know they're caught up in a kind of a temptation to Gnosticism and what that means. Yeah, you say Gnosticism and they're like, what is that?
I know, but it was the big challenge to the early church as well, that in some way, you have, if you like, you have a spiritual dimension to yourself, and yet you're alienated from your own being in some way, that you hate yourself in some way, which, as you've just said, cannot be redeemed. It can only be lost. You need to lose your createdness in some form. You have your body is a problem, right? Which is going to, we know our bodies are problems, but the Christian teaching in the resurrection of the body, which was alienated it from so many people because they couldn't just and again, it's this confidence in God, really, that God himself is the creator and redeemer of all, including of material creation. And maybe we have to start teaching that it's the new heavens and the new earth we're expecting.
Yeah.
We're not expecting the paradise of ethereal spirits.
Right.
That was never the Christian vision. And the martyrs died for the redemption of the body.
Right.
And we have sacraments because of that, because when we take the blessed body of our Lord, he's building a new redemptive body, literally. It's going to be a glorified body, and that's what we're part of. So it is a way of helping, I think, people to realize, first of all, the coherence of Catholicism, and then maybe identifying those places in our worldview where practices, even though we don't ideologically commit to their presuppositions, but for example, that we could live more and more in a virtual world. I find a lot of people very confused that the virtual world is the spiritual world, for example, because it's immaterial. That in some way you can't grasp what a virtual world is.
Right.
But rather than think of it, it's material, and it's less than the human person, not more.
Right.
I think but it is a world in which you can fulfill that sense of, I can create my own avatar,
however I want.
I can appear in any way I want.
Yeah.
I can let go of my true personality, my past, my background, my body, anything I want, and appear as something else. It's if you like, it's not do this in memory of me is about being able to bring, memory, the whole of one's being with one. It seems to me, that we always gather the past, we gather ourselves, gather up the fragments, nothing will be lost. That's always the message of Catholicism, rather than discard all the time and discard your own person for the sake of a being you would like to be.
Right.
And you live more and more in the dream world of your own, which is why I really don't like when church language adopts the thing of follow your dream. What are your dreams for this? There is a way we can understand, dreaming as more real, maybe but it's typically the philosophical tradition spoke about waking up. They typically said you're in the dream world now.
Yeah, you're in the cave.
You're in the cave, you're dreaming, and that's why you can't make sense. You know what it is? You're always trying, you're trying to row a boat ashore, and every time you do it, it sinks. And so you try, there's something not going right in the dream. You're trying to manage it.
You're trying to run fast and you go slower the harder you try.
Yeah, all of these things. So that's a dream world.
Yeah.
And that's the world we're in. It's a bit of a dream world. But the real world is about waking up to something. It's not about dreaming at all. It's coming out of the dream. And one of the old Greek philosophers said, when you dream, you're alone. When you wake up, you're in a common world. We need to move out of this isolated dream world where everybody's on their machine. This is the terrible thing about our civilization. People spend hours on machines on their own.
Yeah.
And they're sucked into it because that's where they can. Doesn't even mean anything to be yourself when you're not bodily being anything.
Right.
You're just imagining something, and something is happening to your consciousness, but it's nothing's happening to you.
Right.
The church is so realistic and straightforward, and I do think we've got to address that. And the other point I thought was very interesting what you said, and I think it's an area where we fear a lot as Catholics. We don't quite know how to manage the political engagement.
Yeah.
I think this is, you see lots of good men being threatened by their bishops, all this sort of thing at the moment, because they're seen to be kind of becoming partisan in some way. And you can see why pastors and the church can't be politically aligned. And, it's very, very sensible not to be. And yet... And I think it's right what you said. The church has the principles of Catholic social teaching, and we need to be able to. We need to have lay people, and to some priests. I suppose lay people need to do it more. Lay people have got to try to explore the application of these principles, and have a certain freedom to do so until the church judges that's outside,
Right.
Because we need to be able to move forward as lay people.
Mm-hmm.
Priests, I think, often step into that role because they don't see lay people doing it.
Right.
And lay people typically who are conservative, Catholic by badge, are not Catholic by any kind of obvious conviction, and the applications are so clearly faulty that the church probably would do a lot. It would do us a service to rule out more interpretations, I think, and say, really, you can't really go down that route.
Right.
One of the problems is that the way politics appears to us is as a package of the good and the bad mixed up like the wheat and the tares. And I think that's why there are legitimate judgments about, do I buy that field or not?
Right.
And I think, but at the same time, the church could be speaking into that. I mean, I see, for example, the populist movements now, as they're growing, there are very few Catholic voices speaking into that and saying, okay, there's so much good in this, which is appearing. But there's also some things which Catholic society we probably couldn't go with. Why don't we try to engage more with that?
Right.
Somebody I admire as a bishop, who I think tries to, tread the line, as Bishop Strickland. Because he really holds firm to only preaching the gospel. But he's trying to defend the right of the church to speak into the public arena.
Right.
And to say things as a bishop, which I think we do need to start saying as well. And I'm not saying, but it's probably a good thing as well when lots of bishops feel freer to do that. They don't have to agree on everything, but they're trying to actually make the application. If they don't do that, lay people are left very much in the dark about what they should do.
Right.
Everything's left on the level of high-level principles with very few application points, seems to me.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So we say subsidiarity, solidarity, common good.
But how does that work?
Yeah, what does that really? We do need to have lots of engaged discussion.
Right.
Because I think then, Catholics will really be far more just authentically Catholic in the public sphere. Really.
I think they would look a lot more like very heavy local engagement too, right? I mean, subsidiarity with the laity. And that's something, I'm just barely beginning to even dive into all the encyclicals on social teaching, but those principles, especially as a business owner, have been so enriching. And, one of the benefits we've had is being able to own the thing that we produce, and, private property as like this inherent human right, like the church teaches, but using it not for my own selfish gain and building bigger grain silos, but for the objective good of my community. And then that gives me responsibility to that community to shape it and to look at the needs of my neighbors, and whatever that is. Out here, it's a lot of agriculture. So what are those people struggling with? How is what I do and what I provide able to help them? And then that becomes a much more engaged citizenship, I think, than going to work, having your private political opinions, voting, hoping that the next president can change all the, that's top down, right? It's just like you were saying with the triangle. If our leaders should be anything like the church, or you would hope they'd be moral, they should be servant leaders too. And so maybe we shouldn't be so focused on the top, but if we engage our local governments as Catholics, it's a lot easier to get things done too, because you don't have as many hoops to swing through. But
that's true conservatism in the authentic way you've said as well, isn't it? Because it's simply, how does one hand on conserve the good in the sense of because it's only conserved to the extent it's handed on fruitfully.
Absolutely.
And that can only happen locally.
Right.
So no, I agree with you.
Yeah.
There is a whole sense, and that's why I really appreciate the kind of much more federalist view here, which keeps taking me by surprise. I keep imagining I'm in one country, and I find in a way I'm in 50 countries. In a way I wasn't quite expecting. You know, so
there was a shocking awakening for most people that was a reality. I think with the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
Yeah,
sure. That we are still
with 50 states of America, and within that you seem to have. And I don't know enough about. I don't think how American sort of society and politics works, but it seems to be there's a lot more delegation as well at even more local levels, like the local community and mayor and so on. So there really is a sense in which you can organize yourself as a community to some extent.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's it's something that's been lost, I think, in lots of places.
And it used to be more so. I mean, it actually used to be to where the senators, for instance, weren't even elected by a popular vote or by a vote from the people. They would have been appointed by the state governments. And so really all of your focus would have been on your state officials, and you would elect to the House of Representatives, and that would be your federal vote, basically.
I see.
So then the senators would have been appointed. They changed that a while ago too, but it is interesting to think about that, because a lot of people that pushed for, well, we should be able to directly elect our senators and that'll give us more of a voice. But I think really almost the reverse has happened in some ways, where now there's just the two parties fighting back and forth with the whole packages they come with, and you're probably not in agreement with either full package.
Yes.
And rather than being able to focus on the people that most directly oversee your day-to-day, and then if those people align with your values, they'll appoint someone that's probably closer and more effective in that sphere, as opposed to the average citizen having to be so engaged in the federal sphere that won't ever be able to speak to their on-the-ground reality the most, you know?
Yeah, sure.
It's been a pleasure to learn about the subsidiarity of the church in that degree too, right? I mean, like, our bishop is the church unto us, like I think it's Ignatius that says that. To you, the bishop is Jesus Christ, the fullness of the church, and yet in communion with all the others. And so if we get to where the Pope is making a decree, it means something really wacky has gone on and he has to step in, ideally, you know. But day to day, we have that same sort of structure where we can have a bishop who does know us, or at least our general region, and then has the priest that he trusts to really know us in our particular locality. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I have one sort of question along the lines of catechesis for you, and I think one of the things I've seen, I saw this as a Protestant, I still see it in Catholicism, and I think we've been talking a lot about our culture. There seems to have been, and I think there is, a shift in how people are being taught the faith and how they're learning it, and probably a shift in a positive way, but it seems to me that for a long time there was this sort of, I call it pizza party evangelism, right? Like, if we have a pizza party and fun games, the kids will come to youth group and we'll sneak Jesus in there somehow. And it seems to try to accommodate the culture, which I don't think has really worked that well, right? Because the kids are like, well, we can have a pizza party at student government meeting or with our football player buddies, and we don't need to have Jesus kind of snuck under the pepperoni to have an enjoying pizza party. Versus, I guess I think what I've seen in that is it almost seems like we've tried to like cheapen or lessen the call of the gospel, thinking that would be a way to soften the blow it had on our culture. But really the reverse has happened. I almost feel like it's come back and it's softened so many believers into not holding to the fullness of it. And I don't know, maybe you wouldn't agree with that, or that's not your perspective, but I'm curious, as someone who studies catechetics, and that's a big bulk of your work, what do you think we ought to do in terms of approaching a culture where, like you said, be obedient to God can be such an offensive statement? And some of the basic tenets of those three things you mentioned are so, almost all three of them are not held by many common people. They wouldn't know that there's reality, that it's good, that we can know it, and that we should order ourselves towards it, you know. What would you say is the approach? Is it something where we should sort of soften it and give them light versions of it, approachable versions of it that are palatable, or maybe it's more of a direct challenge, and maybe not confrontation is the right word, but something that's almost opposed in a way?
Well, I mean, that's the big question you just asked. So we've got another hour probably.
Yeah, okay.
No, but let's go for it. This is such a good question, and what you said will probably be the experience, I suspect, of a lot of Catholics as well, and a certain dissatisfaction. So it's generally thought, and so there's a whole question of what happens to the transmission of the faith, maybe in the 20th century, especially in the period after the Second Vatican Council, and what's happening to it now. And there's no doubt there was an amazing catechetical movement for renewal in catechesis, which was building up in the first half of the 20th century. lots of interesting things happening. You've got the whole of Montessori happening. So you've got a whole kind of an interest in child development, which was really healthy, trying to think about that. There was a whole movement to reconnect to the mystery of the liturgy. There was a whole desire to reconnect the faith to the narrative of the scriptures. There was also a desire to proclaim the teaching of the church as always as good news. So that's called kerygmatic. It's basically, it's the this is the good news. Evangelization means literally, as you know, means, it's the good message. And this was, I became very interested in this partly because where I used to work in the Archdiocese of Birmingham in England, one of the great renewal figures was somebody called Canon Drinkwater.
Okay.
He was a chaplain in the First World War, and he was himself gassed and therefore hospitalized out of the war.
Oh, wow.
And while he was in hospital, he reflected that as a chaplain, he'd seen dozens and dozens of Catholics die without really knowing how to die well. So they, in a way, knew their faith. They kind of knew their catechism in a way. We've already got, of course, the intellectual culture is already difficult.
Right.
But none. So one already imagines that their worldview may not have been Catholic, but they had some truths which they held to. But what he found was that under pressure, the faith wasn't really coming through. And so he decided, he founded a journal called The Sower, and he founded it with some Austrians. So very interesting, 1919, straight after the First World War, because they were all convinced that you needed to renew catechesis to be, if you like, we haven't connected the faith to make it a living faith. So there may be something cognitive, that's something going on.
Right.
They may, and I'm not sure how far they'd thought through other foundations in place culturally for these men, but they knew that the way in which we were teaching doctrine, it was not connecting well to life.
Right.
The Second Vatican Council very much saw itself as trying to see we're in a new position now, whereas the faith had been handed on culturally in and through society and the family. That was no longer really the case.
Right.
And so the Second Vatican Council decided to bring back the rite or the order of Christian initiation. They went back to the patristic period. They said, it's looking more like the patristic period of a long initiation, which is going to be pastoral, liturgical, catechetical, within a Christian community that owns its faith and can hold its members securely. So the Second Vatican Council had a kind of a good understanding, I think, of we are in a new position. We need to do this in a new way.
And spot on, too. I mean, it's looking more like Rome every day.
Well, I've just finished a sabbatical period, and I studied the earliest catechetical institute in the church in Alexandria.
Okay, awesome.
So this is even going back before the kind of the great golden age of the catechumenate. So we're now looking at the church in the early 200s.
Okay.
So definitely it's not being held by culture. It's not being handed on. You've got to do it in community. How do you do it? And so the church at Vatican II wanted to own that and say, let's go back to patristics. Let's go, this is what's called the ressourcement movement. Let's go back to liturgy, patristic, scripture, the fathers. Let's discover how to address our culture, which is in a post-Christian period.
Right. Yeah.
Now, at the same time as that was going on, you had something called the Catechetical Weeks. Now, these were groups of catechetical leaders meeting, not with the bishops. They're independent of that. They had a whole series of weeks, some of which were really fruitful, but the weeks, as they went on throughout the 1960s, picked up, if you like, the revolutionary spirit of the 60s. And it's almost as though the devil got into the renewal. And what they went for was, let's go for a more experience-based catechesis, where you're trying to definitely engage that whole sense of an existential, faith you can really live for.
Mm-hmm.
But they did so at the expense of the what of the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole, if you like, of the excitement of the next generation or so that followed that was this new style catechesis, which essentially evacuated the faith of its content to all extents and purposes, in order to go for how do we make it relevant to this. They saw we needed to do something.
Sure.
But it wasn't by the strengthening of the community, making sure the community was well formed, putting proper structures in place. RCIA was put in place, but often very, very poorly, so that faithful priests really became very suspicious of it, because lay people were asked, you lead RCIA, but they weren't formed to do so.
Yeah.
So lots of people's experiences of RCIA was, lots of people not knowing what it was they were trying to communicate at all. So
that hits home for us coming in too. I was fortunate to have studied theology and at least have some sort of bearings for ourselves. Yeah.
So it was a wonderful vision, but the implementation was not good. So the whole, if you like, okay, so then you get Paul VI trying to let's credo the people of God. We mustn't let go of this, John Paul, he began basically, let's catechize the world again. And he began basically, I'll be the chief catechist. And he just tried to write encyclicals on everything, let's just get it all in place. Let's get a catechism back in place. Let's get these things. And I think the church is wanting to benefit from what it was trying to do, which was a new engagement, which is really trying to see this post-Christian world. The way in which I think it's moving, and it's been moving, is, Pope Francis uses the term accompaniment. I think he's badly communicated as a pope.
Yeah.
But what he means by it, he says it in Evangelii Gaudium, which is his work on evangelization. He said, accompaniment will be useless if it simply meant leaving people where they were or to wandering in the trackless desert.
Right.
If it's not leading a person to God, it is not accompaniment.
Right.
So by accompaniment, he means you need a very strongly relational ministry. And he sees it, and this is how I think Benedict saw it as well, much more as a kind of, let's go back to the spiritual tradition of where you had the master or the father-son relationship of, if you like, more like the Desert Fathers. I have a group of young men I'm leading through. All of those kind of renewals of catechesis and evangelization, which I think are taking place to some extent, where, if you like, the social side and the community side is a necessary element within it. But it's very much one of mentorship, apprenticeship, knowing the souls of those you're working with and leading them into the wisdom which you yourself are trying to live, and we do it together. Everything you've said about being local. It's small community growth. It is placing a lot of reliance upon there being local leaders who can be well formed. And I think that's why everything you're doing is so crucial. This is the place it happens. Montrose community will do it, or nobody will.
Right.
Or else they'll be formed by video games.
Yeah.
The
multiverse.
Yeah. The multiverse. So we need to do it.
The metaverse, rather.
So we need as a community to step up, and the priest obviously has to be the pastoral leader of that. That's the vision of the new directory. It sees it as happening, I think, in small, intense relationships. And there being a formation offered from the living experience of the person who's well formed to communicate the tradition and hand it on. The family, of course, crucial to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
'Cause that's where it's going to happen. That's the small community, and it'll happen. And I think lots of this is what's happening, I think, in a lot of places now. Catholics are deciding we're not going to be helped from above very much.
Right.
We need to just learn how to do this. And good pastors and good bishops and so on are just doing it.
Yeah.
And that is, in a way, the vision.
Okay. That's interesting. That's funny that you say that, because it has been sort of our experience, and in a sense it's almost providential how it's happened in Montrose specifically, right? I mean, we convert, Ben and Carly move here and are going to our parish. There's a couple other families, the same sort of thing, that have moved here, and they're all, I guess, to use a more evangelical term, on fire, right?
Yeah.
where from what we've learned, the history of our parish, there's been a long quiet period of, one or two families being like, I guess it's just us, not knowing what to do with it. And now there's families, there's babies crying during the service, which is just a lovely sound. But that's what we're starting to see, is this direction towards really community engagement among the parish first, I'm guessing, and then hopefully my hope is, and I guess my aim is to eventually direct it outwards too.
Sure, of course.
I joke with our pastor, I'm like, I would love for there to be one church in Montrose in 50 years and have it just be the Catholic Church, but in a real way. I think that's exactly it. If we had a strong, well-formed community, and I think that is the challenge, is well-formed. I know for me, a big part of it has been realizing, like you said, philosophy, reason, coming awake, so to speak, that everyone has been shaped in a worldview to a degree that we probably are unaware of by, the postmodern moment. And that cuts so deep, even into the core of many lifelong committed cradle Catholics in ways that we're not aware of. And so it's almost like having to do surgery on your worldview, so that we can be effective soldiers out in the world evangelistically, right? And I think that's a big part of it. Just for myself, even, what are the things that I operate out of, the beliefs I hold, which are most evident in my actions, that are not compatible with the Catholic worldview?
Sure.
And why are those there? And why am I living off of those as opposed to the liberation of being obedient to God? That's interesting. And that's been something I've seen in my interactions with friends too, is they are looking for something deep, but something that is not, that doesn't accommodate the dysfunctional parts of them, if that makes sense. Which is really, you almost think of it, it's almost counterintuitive, because it seems like everything we've been formed to want is you follow your truth, do what makes you happy, and you'll figure that out. And we'll just be here, like you said, accommodating by letting you do really whatever you want, and just saying we love you by letting you do it. That really ends up being, you're basically destroying yourself, and we're just like, well, we love you. So, and that's what love is to let you fall into whatever self-isolating thing it might be that's your truth, as opposed to something almost oppositional, right? Like I think about the church fathers, and some of them were pretty feisty, but at the same time, they were definitely bold about, this is true, this is the truth, and we, have basically no similarities to some of the pagan worldview, like we're diametrically opposed to it. But rather than just be a loud mouthpiece, they also were such an active force too. I think that's been a big shift in terms of understanding evangelism for me. In a Protestant context, it's just handing out tracts, getting someone to read the Bible, and hoping they make a commitment for Christ. Whereas now it seems a lot more like being involved in my community, helping people on the ground. And even if evangelism is making their social or economic reality better, it's still somehow influencing them towards a more Catholic worldview. And if existentially that's working out better, maybe they'll think about it intellectually or spiritually. I think so. I've just finished reading Clement of Alexandria. The Rich Man's Salvation. And he tells a story at the end which I've really been very moved by, which is he talks about the Apostle John. He said, this is a true story because I know a man who knew John. So he said, this has been handed down. So, and it was, John was going around, founding churches. And he found there was a young man. He thought, this young man's got real potential. And he put him in the care of a local bishop and said, look after this man, instruct him, form him, baptize him, look after him. I'll come back later and, see how you're getting on. So he did. The bishop took him in. For 3 years he lived with him. He formed him, baptized him. Then basically the bishop took his eye off the game. And the young man, he was, half converted, as one is, after in other words, the sacraments were seen as the end points, not the beginning points. The beginning, this is the beginning of a new life, not the end of a formation. And the young man, began to get into habits of vice he thought he'd given up, and he began to associate with friends, and he went slowly downhill, and he basically began to despair of himself because he'd been well formed, he'd been looked after, and now he was not living up to it. And almost Clement says he almost kind of decided to confirm himself as the
as the wretch he was at this point. You know, he was fallen. He was going to prove he was now. And he became the leader of a gang of thieves and started murdering people. And you know.
Oh wow.
Anyway, John comes back, sees the bishop, and you know says, you know, what happened to this young man? I've come back for the deposit I left with you. Which is, he uses the word deposit of faith for the young man. So, which is very moving. That he is, the young man was to be the deposit of faith, you know, fully formed Christ. And the bishop says, I know, you know, he looked all right to me, but, you know, went off the rails and, you know, we just lost him, you know.
Yeah,
we've lost him.
Yeah.
And John immediately he goes off. He works out where he is. He deliberately lets himself be captured by these bandits.
Oh wow!
So he says, "Just take me to this man," you know, and says, "You know, I'm John who was with you. You know, Christ died for you, and I will die for you in your place for everything you've done. If only you'll come back to Christ." And the man is, you know, under John's entreaties, comes back. And John brings him back, and he basically comes and lives with John now, until eventually, Clement just says, until he's put over a church. But it's a beautiful, you know, we have to start taking seriously, this is a very concrete thing, sacramental preparation is the beginning, the sacrament, you know, it's like marriage, you know what it's like.
Right.
The sacrament of marriage is the beginning of my need for formation. It's not, you know, I could never be formed for it.
The wedding is not the end. It's
And, you know, parents getting their child ready for baptism, that's the beginning of the journey.
Right.
You know, confirmation is the beginning. You start formation after. You know, you do formation for it, but you really think differently, and it has to be done locally in these small groups. And I suppose that support and accountability and sense of mutual responsibility is the way we don't plateau. It's the way we bring people in. It's the way conversion continues.
That's good.
Anyway.
And I think that's so necessary, because there is, you know, I think there is probably no such thing as plateauing in the Christian life so much as they're either continually converting. Yeah, or if you become stagnant, you're at risk of being off the path altogether with just the slightest, you know, wind gust.
Yeah,
And I'm reminded of like Colossians, where Paul says, you know, blown to and forth with every cunning human doctrine. I think that speaks to the experience of so many today. You know, one foot in and one foot out, kind of not knowing how to handle, you know, well, here's what the world says about this issue and the church says that, and I don't really know where I stand. But yeah, to be firmly rooted in the local expression of the body of Christ and all of its fullness, and sacramentally and intellectually and spiritually engaged.
And not being afraid, I suppose, speaking to one another in these groups you're discovering and saying, shall we make a commitment to be like that with each other? It is going to cost something, obviously, for everybody who does that, because, you know, you do say we will commit to being accountable to one another in some sense, you know, become brothers and sisters keepers in some way. And it doesn't have to be lots of formal formation, but there is a commitment to and a willingness, and you say, yes, the other may take an interest in my soul, you know, and that's something, a good I want. A good I want, and I'm going to, you know, live in a certain amount of increasing trust with one another. And I think that's what does convert others as well. They see they don't have that in their lives. People who really care for each other,
right,
and are trying to, you know, just support one another in a Christian life like that. So,
that is,
anyway, that's the church's vision as far as I can see.
And I think it sounds good. It sounds like that will be the thing that works.
The thing that works. The thing that works. The church's wisdom.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for being on the show.
Drew.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah.
If someone has listened to this and wants to learn more about your work or find you, where can they go to learn more?
Well, we run a catechetical institute, which I know, in fact, the diocese here is in partnership with. So it's CI for Catechetical Institute at franciscan.edu is the institute's address.
And then you've written a couple books as well. And Okay.
Yes. So I've written a book. Well, Catherine and I wrote a book on marriage, which is
Oh,
out of print, but
excellent.
you can still get.
You can still find it.
You can
Okay.
still find
Yeah.
it because, of course, nobody wanted it, so they put it on second
no.
hand. But it's called Become What You Are.
Okay.
So we wrote one about. Then I've written a few books on the Catechism. You know,
Okay.
things like the Craft of Catechism and the Craft of Catechesis. And a year with Catechism, I wrote, walking people through the Catechism. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Willie, just for coming
Thank you.
on and
Thank you.
talking with us. I think it's been a fruitful conversation. Everybody watching, thank you so much for spending that time with us. And if you've gotten this far to the end of it and you think there's someone else that would benefit from this conversation, please don't hesitate to share it, whether it's the video form on YouTube or the audio form, wherever podcasts are found. And if you're watching for the first time and you like conversations like this, I would love to keep having them as well. So please subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Drew the Catholic.